Do you think that the hardest part of following God is figuring out what He wants you to do? Because sometimes the hardest part is actually leaving when He tells you to. Because obedience often means walking away from people you've known for years, from places that feel familiar, and from situations that were never healthy to begin with. Genesis 31 isn't just about Jacob leaving home. It's about what happens when God tells you it's time to move, and the people benefiting from your presence don't want to let you go. Jacob has now spent 20 years working for his uncle Laban. 20 years. When Jacob first arrived, he had almost nothing. He was running from his brother Esau after deceiving him out of the family blessing. Laban welcomed him in, but that welcome came with a price. Over the years, Laban repeatedly changed Jacob's wages and manipulated the agreement between them. Every time Jacob started to prosper, Laban tried to shift the rules in his own favor. Sound familiar? Sometimes people only support you as long as they're the ones benefiting. Genesis tells us something has changed. Laban's sons begin saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father owned." They weren't telling the truth. Jacob had earned what he possessed through years of hard work and God's blessing. But envy rarely cares about facts. Have you ever noticed how quickly people can rewrite history when your life starts improving? Even Laban's attitude changes. The man who once welcomed Jacob now looks at him differently. The relationship has become toxic. And then God speaks. This is the line. Genesis 31:3. The Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." Notice what God doesn't say. He doesn't promise the journey will be easy. He doesn't tell Jacob Laban will understand. He doesn't explain every detail. He simply gives a command and a promise. Go, and I will be with you. That promise appears throughout Scripture. When God called Moses, He promised to be with him. When God commissioned Joshua, He promised to be with him. And before Jesus ascended into heaven, He told His disciples, "I am with you always." God's presence has always been the greatest promise. Jacob gathers Rachel and Leah out in the fields, away from listening ears. He explains everything. How Laban kept changing his wages, how God protected him, how the flocks multiplied despite Laban's schemes, and then something remarkable happens. Rachel and Leah agree. They've watched their own father use them like bargaining chips. They tell Jacob, "Whatever God has said to you, do." Sometimes the people closest to you can recognize God's direction before you have the courage to act on it. So, Jacob gathers his family, his servants, his livestock, and quietly leaves. Not because he's trying to steal, not because he's afraid of the truth, but because experience has taught him exactly how Laban responds when he doesn't get his way. Then Genesis includes one of its strangest details. Rachel steals her father's household gods. Why? The Bible never explicitly tells us. Some scholars think these household idols were connected to her inheritance rights in that culture. Others believe that Rachel was still attached to the false gods she grew up with. Either way, it creates a problem. Isn't it interesting? God is leading this family toward the land he promised, yet someone is still secretly carrying idols. How often do we do the same thing? We follow God, but keep something hidden that doesn't belong in our lives. A sin, an obsession, a grudge, a source of security that isn't God. 3 days later, Laban discovers Jacob is gone. He pursues him for 7 days. Imagine that, an entire week knowing someone angry is catching up to you. But before Laban arrives, God intervenes. Then we look at Genesis 31:24. God warns Laban in a dream, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Laban still confronts Jacob. He accuses him of sneaking away. He demands to know why he wasn't allowed to throw a farewell celebration. And then he asks about the missing idols. Jacob has no idea Rachel took them. Confident of his innocence, he says, "Anyone found with them should not live." Rachel hides the idols beneath her camel's saddle and tells her father she can't stand because she's menstruating. Laban searches everywhere and finds nothing. The tension finally breaks. Jacob has had enough. For 20 years, he's worked in the heat of the day and the cold of the night, and during sleepless nights, and watched Laban change his wages again and again. Now he says it out loud. "If the God of my father had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed." There it is. Jacob finally recognizes what has been true all along. It wasn't his cleverness. It wasn't luck. It wasn't manipulation. God was the one preserving him. Laban can't deny it anymore. So they make a covenant. They pile up stones as a witness between them. The ancient world viewed stones like these, stone heaps, often to serve as public reminders of agreements. Anyone passing by could see that there had been a binding covenant made in that place. Laban says, "May the Lord keep watch between you and me." Today, people often use that verse as a sentimental blessing. But that's not really what's happening. It's actually a boundary marker. They're saying, God is watching. Don't cross this line to harm one another. It's peace through separation. Sometimes reconciliation doesn't mean returning to the way things were. Sometimes peace requires healthy boundaries. And that's exactly how this chapter ends. Laban goes home. Jacob continues towards the promised land. Their paths separate. This chapter reveals something important about God. God sees injustice even when it lasts for years. He isn't blind to exploitation. He isn't absent during seasons of waiting. He works behind the scenes, often far longer than we would like, but he always works according to his purpose. And what does this chapter reveal about people? We cling to control. We envy God's blessings on others. We sometimes carry idols into the very future God is calling us toward. And we often resist leaving situations we've already outgrown because familiarity feels safer than obedience. So what about you? Is God asking you to trust him enough to leave something behind? A habit, a relationship, a mindset, an old identity? Or maybe, like Rachel, are you carrying hidden idols while convincing yourself you're fully following God? Genesis 31 reminds us that God's call isn't just about arriving somewhere new. It's about becoming someone different along the way. Sometimes the most faithful step you'll ever take is simply walking away when God says, it's time. May the truth set us all free.